Welcome to another episode of Rooftop Conversations. So, one of the things that came out of the pandemic was a lot of us not decided, but we started working from home. And from that, a lot of us had the opportunity to pursue creative projects. Of course, Rooftop Conversations being one of them. And I'm about to interview two young women who have started their own creative podcast, um, which chronicles their lives as 20-something-year-olds living through this unprecedented pandemic and how to survive the mess of being in your 20s, and of course being in such like a new, I don't want to say like the new normal, the new world, but yeah. And they're like super awesome, super great. I've listened to a couple of their episodes, and it hits me in the heart as someone who is in their mid 20s and is they're not a hot mess, but I definitely am. So I'd like to welcome my next two guests on this show, the 20-something podcast, Yailyn Valez and Priscilla Peguero. So Yailyn and Priscilla, just tell the audience about yourselves, what you guys do, who you are, and just a little something about you. Well, you both as individuals.
Well, I guess we could start speaking on the 20-something podcast and then like stem out on who we are as individuals. So the 20-something podcast is pretty much a podcast where we want to focus on like self-improvement, self-help, and how we as individuals want to help like not only Hispanic communities, but POC and minority communities, because I feel like there's a lot of things that we do not have access to. And that's something that we want to make sure that we give to our public or whoever listens to us. And just to give a little background on ourselves, like I am personally someone that has always been told by my family members, like, oh, like make sure that like you follow this path of like engineering or something that's going to like set something solid for you, versus like I know I'm more of like a creative entrepreneurial person. So I like photography as well as like writing and stuff.
And I'm Yailyn, and in the same sense, but almost an opposite, because I feel like you were just talking about, like you went through the engineering side. I come from a creative background. Like a lot of my family is super creative. So makeup has always been my passion, and I'm still a makeup artist. But I went to school for like cosmetics and fragrance marketing and at FIT. So it's like two streams, and it connects to our podcast in a sense, because it's something that has to do about your physical appearance and like what is being sold to society. But it also connects to like inner beauty and like what's really important, because like for a long time for me, I got stuck in like, you have to look a certain way in order to succeed or do anything in life, because I'm coming from makeup. And then understanding that, yes, I love makeup, but I love it because it makes me feel like stress-free. It's good for my mental health. But I want to make that known. I want to make sure that I'm showing a side of me that it's not about being superficial or anything like that. It's more about like you need to be good inside in order to be a better person.
No, definitely. I agree with like the whole first of all, thank you so much for introducing yourselves. You both sound like amazing, professional, motivated, driven young women. And first of all, Yailyn, I definitely agree with the whole inner beauty thing. I think not right now. This is my workout wear that I wear.
Girl, you look great.
I'm like, oh god, this is not me at my like most fashionable, but I definitely agree.
Color. Yeah, like a good color.
Fashion is definitely like a big part of like my aesthetic, and like I love it so much. I think especially as a plus size woman, a fat person, I definitely know that pressure of having to look a certain way when you're a woman of color, when you have all these different intersectionalities. But like not only like you like can fashion just like fit like is used to like fit a certain norm to kind of like show your outer beauty, but it can also be expressing yourself and who you are inside. And I think that's such a beautiful thing about creative work and fashion and things like that. But on that note, Priscilla, you mentioned that you started this podcast as a way to kind of provide a resource for Hispanic young people, and also like people of color, and just other like kind of like be a resource for folks, for a lot of us, as I'm gonna say from personal experience, being like a first generation, like I'm like a daughter of like Asian immigrants coming to this like new country, and I don't know what it's like to be a 20-something-year-old in the United States and things like that, because it's like I don't know what that's like. And like, so I definitely understand like the importance of a resource like a podcast, so that you have people who may be in that same boat, like, what do I do being 20-something? And like you're balancing both, like you said, right, the expectations of your parents and the path that your parents want for you, but also like being yourself, like, and like really pursuing your own path and living your own life. But like, I'd love to hear more, and like, for like, in both your words, Priscilla and Jaylene, like, why did you start the 20 something podcast? Like, I'd love to hear in detail your process, like what came about it, why now, like why start it now during this pandemic and everything.
Okay, so the 20 something podcast was done almost on a whim because like we said before, Priscilla came from an engineering background, and I'm obviously like makeup artist background, or just beauty in general. And so we've been long friends for like 7 years or something. And so we've always worked together in some way, because I needed pictures for like a portfolio that I was trying to create, just to show my work. And Priscilla also was a photographer. And so there were times where we would hang out, we would have these creative ideas. So we would like work together. And so this pandemic hit, and like it was really hard for me in a sense, because obviously like I was going through my own things. Like I said before, like mental health was really hard for me during quarantine. And I had to do the work on my own and research and find things that would make me feel better. And in that way, like Priscilla was also going through the same things. And we were having like these deep conversations, and we were sharing links about certain things and articles and books. And so as we started that, I was like, Priscilla, we should start something. Like we should do something. And so we decided to do a podcast, because there's so many about like self-help and improvement and like mental health in general. But like you said, I don't see it a lot from the Hispanic community. I also don't see it like from my family, or just in general, people talking about their mental health. So I think it's a platform for all people of color, all people that have gone through something like super deep or tough in their time. And in a sense, we just connected, and we realized that this was important not only for us, because the podcast is for everyone to see, everyone to hear it, but it's also helping us at the same time.
Right. And I remember when Jaylene like first came to me with the whole like, oh yeah, let's start this podcast.
I was so nervous.
But I'm just the type of person that it's like, well, this is an opportunity that presented itself. We're both struggling through this thing. So how can we help ourselves and also help others at the same time? And that's something that I was like, okay, I'm ready to do it.
I think like, yeah, like that's like the beautiful thing about podcasting or content creation, right? Like when you're listening to a podcast, it seems like you're just talking to a friend who could relate to you in some way, as opposed to like, oh, reading some like a book by some like expert, or some like, I don't know, someone with a PhD, like, okay, yeah, this is what you have to do to improve your mental health, rather than just like listening to a podcast where it's two people. Like, I might not know you personally, but we can relate on so many ways, and it just seems like you're talking to a friend and hearing your friend talk about their experiences. And yeah, it could be a resource. And especially like, I love content creators who are like independent content creators and creators of color, because you know, the media, like mainstream media, does not work for us. And I just love that more people are stepping into that role and being like, we're going to take our voices and our messaging and our stories, and we're going to do something about it with our own creative control. Yeah, and like podcast, like to Jaylene's point, right, about mental health, like it's so, creating also heals the soul, at least in my opinion. Like I know for me personally, I started this podcast, so I'm an extrovert, and when quarantine hit, I'm like, what do I do now? I can't go out to the clubs. I can't go out to the bar. I mean, this is the first thing I thought about. Like, it's so, like, you know, like, really frivolous, but that's the first thing I thought about. I couldn't go to the gym, which was, like, a big part of my life at that point. I couldn't see the people that I wanted to see, so it was like, let's do this rooftop conversations, and I'll just FaceTime people and record this. At least like I can feel better about just like talking to someone and feeling connected to the community in like during this like weird unprecedented God, I cannot speak today. Weird unprecedented time. So thank you so much for sharing your story. And like, you know, you both cover a lot of topics, you know, from mental health, from careers to intuitive eating, which is like a huge thing for a lot of women, especially, you know, with like diet culture and things like that. But there's the one episode that really hit me, and I don't know, because like I'm also personally going through something right now too, was your episode about passion versus purpose. So in the episode, Priscilla, you spoke about you go to engineering school, and going from engineering school and then like working at like a 9 to 5 job, and it wasn't really fulfilling your soul, and you just made the decision like, okay, I'm done, I'm gonna move to Spain and do what I have to do, and like have this adventure, and like eat churros and tapas, or like live your life. And of course, like I follow, so like background on Priscilla and I like, Priscilla is someone I met in college, so I do follow her on social media, on her personal Instagram, and like seeing her really travel through Spain and through Europe and doing these like travel logs and things like that. And then Yailyn, you were literally telling like, I'm gonna quit my job, which is like literally a big decision, especially for like millennials. Like, I'm gonna quit my job to fulfill my passion of being a makeup artist. And that's sometimes like the hardest. I think both those decisions of, okay, I'm gonna quit my job and go to Spain, and I'm gonna quit my job and like live out my passion, are probably the two scariest things anyone can do. Like, I mean, it's terrifying. So first, I would love to hear, like, in your own words, why you both had that. How did you have the courage to like pursue those things? And like, for a lot of people these days, right, with COVID-19, it's getting a lot of like millennials really thinking like, what am I living for? My job isn't fulfilling me. People are being laid off. Like, I myself I'm like unemployed right now because my fellowship just wrapped up, and I'm now like looking at life in a new way. So like, just like for people who are listening, who are mostly millennials, for you both, like, how would you describe passion versus purpose in your words? And how did you two find that courage to like live out your passions and to make those big steps?
So passion and purpose are something that aren't necessarily like all in one. They could, for the most part, be separate things. And I think for us, especially, finding ways in which we could make our passion and purpose work, it is so important. But I think it's also crucial to say that the journey to do that is very difficult, because it's something that could be completely unexpected. And to answer your question about how we had the courage to do the things we wanted to, like, for instance, going to Spain, I think it had to do to connect it back to mental health. Like, I was at my job at a 9 to 5 where I was like done. There was nothing else that would just solve my mental issues. And seeing the opportunity to go to Spain and like have a teaching position there that would allow me to have the freedom to just relax and think and take a step back to see what my next moves are was very crucial for me. And I think if I hadn't done that, I would have been in a completely different place.
Yeah, I kind of agree in that sense. I was working at Sephora, and I was a senior makeup artist there. And so for a long time, my beauty has always been something that I loved. It actually helped me through mental health and self-love, because growing up, I always had very low self-esteem. And so my freedom, or like how I felt really good about myself, was like creating something. I'm not a painter. I wish I was, or I can't draw or anything like that. So like growing up, I always used to see like family members, and like they would put on their makeup. And so obviously, as like growing up, I didn't know how to do any of that. But it was so cool to see how you can change structure and like see different things in different lighting. So when I was younger, I picked it up when I was like 11 or 12. And so I always used that as time for myself. And so that kind of helped me with my self-esteem growing up. And so I've always envisioned doing something with makeup, or like working in for marketing, or creating my own brand or something like that, ever since I was like in middle school. And so I almost created like a routine or a step or a guide to get to where I wanted to be. And so then I went from college and like graduating with that degree, and I was like, okay, like I'm going to find a job, whether it's like with a L'Oreal or Estee Lauder. And then slowly starting to realize that I didn't want to do that. And so I stayed at my job, and I reached a really high level position, which was like the senior makeup artist. And then from there, I just didn't know what I wanted to do next. And it was very limited at my job already, because there wasn't much to do. So I almost felt like stuck as an artist. Like, what do I do next? How can I improve myself? How can I get better? And so I realized like it was my time to go, but I was kind of scared. So like my passion is beauty, because that's the first thing that has ever made me feel good about myself, or good to be able to spread that to others, be able to put like a smile on somebody else's face. But thinking about it, like you said, like mental health, right? Like it's so important. It makes me think of like quarantine. Like if I did not work on myself and my mental health, like how can I pursue my passion as well? Right. And so I was having a conversation with Priscilla the other day, and I was kind of telling her like, I think for me, maybe I'm just saying this too early, but I think my passion and my purpose in the future will blend together, because yes, it has to do with beauty. So I think, but I think it has to do with helping other people understand that there's more to than just your physical. Like there's so much more to like what you have inside, who you are as a person. And I think people need to know that more, or at least people that look like us need to know that more.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. That's like, I think you both bring up like the point of mental health, right? That's like really the biggest catalyst for you both making those decisions and giving you the courage to be able to pursue what you really do want, like pursue your passion and explore that passion. And I think for a lot of us millennials, like we grew up like, I think like our parents being like the boomers or Gen X's or whatever, I don't even know the generation names, but like our parents growing up in the age that they did, and especially like immigrant parents or like parents of color, where it's like, all right, we need to focus on surviving, right? Because, you know, as people of color or as immigrants or children of immigrants, it's like, how are we going to make it to our next step? How are we going to, like, we're always thinking about like logical first steps to survive. And we oftentimes forget about things like our passion and our purpose, right? We're always just like, what's going to get us most money? What's going to get us the most like resources? And like, you know, it does stem into things like you said, like Priscilla, or like, you know, like how you were saying, like I had to go to engineering. I had to do something that's like completely opposite from what I wanted to do because I had to follow what my parents want me to do. And it's hard. I think a lot of us are still learning that. It's a huge part of, I think once you get into your 20s, you start to think like, all right, like now that I'm done with school and like I've been told to go to school and get a job and do this all my life, what is there else to do when you get that job? And like you said, right, Jailyn, like you get stuck in your job sometimes. Like you just like, what's the reason? What is the point of working there? And like, yeah, I think it's just a question that all of us, like, at least like for what I know and from my experiences, being in the legal field, in a field that's so rigid and so like strict and so like very conformist, and now having this pandemic, a lot of myself and my colleagues are now thinking like, after like being laid off or having after like quitting our jobs, we're all like, oh, do we really want to be lawyers now? Like, is this what drives us? Is this what like really gives us a passion? And yeah, I think that's what quarantine is really helping us think. And I think like you both are very forward thinking in that these were decisions that were made like pre-quarantine, and these are like lessons that from your life that you're giving to us now, like those listening now in quarantine. So thank you for sharing. And okay, so you're in your 20s. I'm also in my 20s as well. I'm 26 years old, and I think it's honestly the most confusing time of my life. Like I've probably made every bad decision I've ever made in life was made in my 20s. Like from 20 to 26, every bad or dumb decision I've made in all aspects, job, career, men, horrible mistakes were made in that time period. So, and it's a confusing time, right? It's a time when you're kind of like not really an adult, but then you kind of are, but then like you're just leaving childhood for the first time and you don't know what to do. So there's all this bunch of stuff to like, you know, all these things that you have to worry about. So I'd love to hear from you both. Like, what are some challenges that you both have to face aside from like your job and your passion, your purpose, but what other challenges have you both faced in your 20s and how have you overcome them?
So I think for me, a challenge that I faced and I'm still like going through it right now too, is like understanding that everything takes time. Because I mentioned before, like school and like having a set routine and like understanding a schedule and like knowing that's what you're going to be doing. So I've always been someone that has lived specifically in a moment, because if I thought too much in the future, I would get overwhelmed. So like school was a really good distraction for me because it was something that was constant. Like I didn't have to think about it. I had to do it, and that was that. And so like understanding that after you leave college, that you're in control of your own life and that you shouldn't fear anything. That's a big challenge for me in my 20s, especially now since I'm 25, because people put so much pressure on that number that it makes me think like, oh my God, like I need to get a job, I need to have a family, I need to do all these things. And then seeing people like being able to be professional and have their business and be successful, I'm just like, oh my God, I got to do that right now, because if I don't do it right now, how am I going to get there? And so like even right now, we're in a pandemic, right? So sometimes I'm just like, all right, chill. Like you can't do anything. Like we're in a place where like we're doing the best that we can. and whatever is available is what we have to take. And hopefully this doesn't last for a long time and we're able to find our way. But always just staying in control and understanding that things are going to happen. You just have to take time and just work really hard.
Mm-hmm. And I think for me, a challenge has been dealing more of the financial aspect of being in our 20s, because it's like, I feel like just being a minority, POC, Black, like we have like less access and opportunities to things than like other individuals. And just finding a way and a space in which we could try to achieve that is so important. And for me, I like traveling, and like being able to travel like in a conducive and like learning way is very difficult when you don't have the means, as well as like all of our other passions, of course.
No, definitely. Like the finances in your 20s, it's like, oh my God, it's like I can't even afford to like move out because the money is low and like the rent is so high. Yeah, no, it's like interesting because like the 20s is like that weird like blur path where it's like you said, Jaylene, right? It's the first time you're not given a structure and you're not given a constant like school. It's like, okay, you're on your own. What do you do? And you have obviously people where you like once you hit 25, right? People think like, oh my God, the world's gonna end. Like this is it. And especially for like women, like for some reason, everyone thinks our world ends at like 30. Like I don't know what it and like it's like once you hit 30, that's it. Like you're done. Like your life is gone. And it's like that concept of time, right? I think like that's what the pandemic has at least taught me, and I think it's becoming like a thing for most people. Like, what is time? What's that concept? What does it really mean? Like, if you get your first job at 25, or you get your first house at 25, or if you're still living at home at 25, or you're still like volunteering, or if you're, like, what does that all mean? And I think like that's the biggest lessons like I've had to learn too. Like, taking your time and not comparing yourself to every single person out there. Like, oh my God, the amount of like I used to get so much pressure, like, oh, if I don't move out by like this time, I'm a failure. Like I haven't like lived life, or if I haven't won my first election by this time, then I'm a failure. When I'm just like, okay, these things do take time. I'm not ready yet. And like you just know when it's ready. I think that's like the biggest lesson that a lot of us have to learn, which goes into my next question. I think growing up, right, you're set with these standards and these milestones that you have to meet, right? Like you have to like get your license at 16, and you have to get your car at 18, and you have to move out by like 18, 19, get your first house by like 23 or whatever, get your first job right out of college, get married by a certain time. And like, now that we're heading into this, like, as millennials, right, those milestones. So yeah, a lot of us as millennials, like there's like these milestones that we grew up with, right? But like because we lived through like a whole bunch of economic crises, recessions, now we have a pandemic, it's hard to like hit those things, right? It's hard for some of us, it's hard to get a car, it's hard to get a house. It's hard to find a partner or like a relationship or to get married. It's hard to have kids. They're so expensive. So those traditional milestones just aren't there for a lot of us. And that expectation of like, this is how the 20s are supposed to look like. We're supposed to have fun. We're supposed to get wild and then like settle down at 25 and then like become like this adult out of nowhere. So a lot of people online, especially like young kids, like young people who are like in college now, and they're like, this pandemic is never going to let me have the college experience that I've seen on TV. It's not going to let me like go to the clubs. It's not going to let me go to the bar. I can't have that first experience of like drinking legally or whatever. Hookup culture is now dead. So like I can't do whatever I had to, like a lot of these things that like people are kind of like feeling they're missing out on because of this pandemic. So, you're both in your 20s now, and even though you've gotten to like live a good chunk of like the first part of your 20s with the pandemic, I'd love to hear, how do you both cope with being in your 20s during this time? But then also, what can you say to other people like who just entered their 20s and they're now in this like pandemic right now? Like, what's some advice that you can give them?
I think for me personally, what really has worked is setting a routine. I think it's so important to look at that one thing that makes you feel better, but that you feel like it's also helping you in one way or the other, and just do that daily. For me personally, it's just doing a workout. And like doing a workout a day has helped me with mental clarity, has helped me just overall now like know that there's the rest of the day and I could potentially achieve something else. But I also don't put pressure on myself to do other things. Like if that's all I could do for that day, great. But if it has motivated me to do something else, like I for sure go for it. And I would write it down or I would take mental notes, but for sure setting a routine.
I'm going to say the same thing. Setting a routine, but also like making sure that you don't feel stressed out about what you're doing. Because when the pandemic hit and we were all in quarantine in the beginning, like I know a lot of people did like freaked out, but I like went through like a moment. And so coming from a person of routine, I created this whole routine in hopes that I would be so busy that I wouldn't even think about what was going on in the world. And then obviously you go through that period where you're like being so good at it. And then there comes a time where just like everything just goes beep.
It kind of backfired on you, right?
Yeah. So it completely backfired. So what I've been doing now is just like you said, choosing one thing that you know you're in control of or that can help you in some way. I know a lot of people are fortunate to have their jobs. Unfortunately, I'm unemployed at the moment. So I have to be positive about my options. So I try to do something that's going to help me when we get out of this. So like you do working out. I like to read books, self-help or self-improvement books, because they've been really helping me like with my mental health and like clarity and understanding that everything's going to be okay. And as for like your other question, that it was just like advice to give to everyone that's in their 20s or just in general or in life, I think it's just don't be fearful of the future, and stay consistent. Stay consistent with everything that you do in life. And I'm promising you this, but don't take my word for it. If you're consistent, you'll always get to like a good result. It might not be the result that you want, but you'll get to where you want to be. And that's something that's a positive affirmation for myself. Whenever I feel down or I'm stuck, I'm always just like, stay consistent. Stay consistent, because something will come out of that. And if it's not something good, you'll learn from it in that sense.
And to quickly add on to the stay consistent thing, I feel like our culture is so focused on instant gratification that like we forget that we need to have patience and things take time.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. Like this, I think it's like because of like capitalism or whatever. Like we just need that, like especially now with social media. It's like that like just gives us that like, oh my god, that like high. Accomplishments give us this high. But then I think in one of your podcasts, I'm gonna give people like a sneak preview of your podcast. Yailyn said one of the things that like really hit me personally that you said was pre-pandemic you used to wake up at 6 a.m. and then post-pandemic you now wake up at 8. And so pre-pandemic, I used to wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning, 6 o'clock to go to the gym because my boxing class would start, depending on the day, either 6 a.m. or 7 a.m. So I'd wake up like bright and early, like not bright and early. It was still dark. It was like winter time. So it was like dark and early. The sun wasn't up. And it was just like a great way for me to like get started with the day. It was like no distraction. The streets were empty. I could think to myself, go to class, get my day started. I was also working a job that I was like for you both, it just wasn't fulfilling me and like fulfilling my passion or my interest. So like it just helped make my day a lot better. And yeah, I think like so like you know, it just kind of like was like this is the start to my day. I had a routine. I was like 2020 is gonna be my year. I'm gonna make this my thing. I had a plan because like I spent like, so back to the topic of mental health, right? I spent my early 20s in law school, and it was really tough because I was in an environment where I had to grow up really fast, be a professional at such a young age. Like while my friends were out there partying and living their lives, I was still taking finals. I was still like in school. I had to be a certain person because of like the industry that I'm in, and that was like literally mentally drained. Like my mental health was shot in law school. And like when 2020 hit, I was like, okay, new year, new me. I'm going to go to the gym, set a routine, do this. My life is great. I'm finally going to be somebody. And then the pandemic hit. And then like Yailyn, I would start like waking up at like, okay, I used to wake up at 5 and 6, right? Which is pretty early. And now I wake up at like 8 or 9, which for some people is still early. But for me, that's like late. Yeah. And like, I think the best advice you gave, Yailyn, in the podcast was you said that don't beat yourself up if you wake up at like 8 or 9 and you used to wake up at 5 and 6, right? Just, you know, it's fine. Things are different. but also work up that progress, right? You said, like, you started waking up at, like, instead of 6, you worked on waking up at 7:45 and 7:30 and 7:15, and you just kept going with that progress. And I think back to your comment about instant gratification, Priscilla, it's like we don't always focus on the outcome and the result and the accomplishments, but we never talk about the progress, even like the little things, right? Like whether it's like something like I did a HIIT exercise for the day. I survived HIIT exercises, which is, as someone who does HIIT exercises, burpees kill you, squats, and I don't know, it's a lot. From surviving that and just doing that for like 25 minutes, or even getting up at like 7 instead of 8 o'clock, you know what I mean? That's like a big accomplishment, or like at least progress. And I think those things have to be celebrated. And like we forget that, as a society, we forget about those little things. So like your podcast does serve as a reminder for a lot of us to like, hey, like cherish the small things, cherish those small progresses, like as long as you're moving. And I think that's what it is. Like your podcast does a great job at this. As long as you're moving into a direction and you're constantly learning, you're doing something, and that's like the main point of surviving your 20s. And you both do a really great job at like conveying that in your podcast. Mm-hmm. So back to the podcast, like as I mentioned before, right? Everyone decides to start these creative projects, including myself. So I'd love to hear, like, on a content creator type of perspective, like, how has it been to produce a podcast during a time like this? Especially like, I'm guessing you both are independent doing this. It's just you two, and you're doing. I mean, being a content creator, when it's like you're on a one person or a 2-person team, you're the CEO, the COO, the CFO, the production assistant, the camera person, the editor, you're the marketer. Like, you're all these different things. I definitely understand that stress. So how has it been, in your words, producing a podcast between the two of you and having to do every little role?
I feel like we're now in such a good flow that I honestly have blocked all of the negative like aspects of it. But in the beginning, there were times when like we messed up really bad, and we would have to record our podcast again, and like it was absolutely draining and just. But I feel like we kept positive and we just pushed through, and that has helped immensely.
Yeah, like it's hard. I mean, sometimes we're just like, we wish we had somebody that can edit, or just like someone that can like give us guidance as to what we're doing. Mm-hmm. And it can be really hard if you're like you said, you're doing everything on your own. And sometimes with like social media and instant gratification, like being confident about like what you're doing, right? Because sometimes it's just like that you're doing good, like your podcast or like what you're doing is so good, but you want to express that to other people, and sometimes other people don't understand that, or they don't support you in the way that you thought they would. Right. Yeah. So it becomes tough because you're just like, I know this is good for everyone else as well, but we just wish we had more. And so like for us, we realized like, obviously, like we're unemployed, so what can we do with what we got, right? Because we're not trying to break the bank. We're trying to do something that we're passionate about, but also give quality in the ways that we can. Right. And so we realize like there are certain things that we'll spend our money on and things that we won't, because you see all like this high tech stuff and like we get excited about these things, but like we're not in a place to do that. So we just try to do the best that we can. Mm-hmm. But it can be really hard sometimes, like finding new ways of like advertising or marketing, and like we don't really get feedback from like somebody that's higher up, because we're the people giving feedback to each other,
Right.
It's tough.
And just to quickly add on to like the whole like how you were saying that like sometimes you wish you had like an editor and stuff. I feel like if anything that would just help us like in the long run, because like you learn every aspect of the process, and like it's more fulfilling knowing that you did all this hard work to get to the final product.
No, like I think that back to the instant gratification thing, I definitely feel it too. Like as a content creator, like there'll be times when I'm like, oh my God, this is so great, but like no one's really watching my videos. I'm not getting that many likes on my posts. And like even getting people to come on, I'm like, oh my God, like do they want to come on? Like I don't know. And it's just like, it's always like, you want to produce content. You want to get like the billions of likes. You want to get the ads. You want to get the sponsorships. I get it. Like it's definitely like hard, but it's like, and like those things get you down. There are even some days where I'm like, I don't want to do rooftop conversations anymore. I'm tired. Like I'm like like I'm bloated. Right now, that's my situation. I'm bloated right now. I'm like it's hot. Like I work outside, sometimes the sun's beaming in my face and I'm sweating and it's a lot. And like working with like I'm also unemployed. I'm literally filming half my show on I'm on an iPod and an iPhone 7 recording this with like a headset I got from like Walmart and like there are times I'm like I wish I had like good audio, but audio sucks because I have like the wind coming in or like the Zoom internet isn't working on my favor and it's so hard. Like but I think like it's once again, right, it goes to progress and learning and pushing through. I think like both like all three of us have been in the position where it's like you just want to keep going and like back to like your point, Priscilla, about providing a resource, right? Like at the end of the day, you're creating not just for like you're creating for like two things, right? To help others out there, to send a message to folks, to be and to influence to someone who's listening, right? Maybe there is a young like Hispanic person who just entered their 20s and they're like, what the hell do I do now? And they find themselves in this podcast, or they find that representation that you both are bringing to the table. And then more importantly, you're helping yourselves, right? You're like, you're creating content that makes you feel good about yourself. You're fulfilling your soul. And I think those are things that like, I think that's the beauty of content creation, that like it's gritty, it's hard work. You sit there, you're frustrated. There are times when like you just want to give up and like this like what am I doing this for? It's so much work. But then there are times like that when you're like like even one person's like, I listen to your podcast, I feel great about it, I love it, this is the best thing ever. Or even if one person was like, I believe in you, your message hit me today. And even if you learn something from the other person, like if you learn something from your podcast and doing that, I think that's like all worth it. And I think that's a lesson that you both have taught me just being in this podcast right now, just like learning how to slow down and take time and appreciate that progress. Because as a 26-year-old, and I'm telling you right now, even when I'm 30, I'm probably still going to have to keep learning this. Like it's okay to slow down and take your time. And I'm about to I'm going to have to make a podcast that competes with yours soon called like 30 something. Because at this point, like it's getting there. I'm getting there. I'm getting to that part of my life soon. But yeah, and then, before we wrap up, I'd love to hear my last two questions to you. So what's the most exciting part about being in your 20s? I mean, like, I feel like we talk so much about the challenges and the difficulties, but your 20s can be fun. Life, I mean, once again, still learning this lesson as well, but life can be fun. So what has been a great part? Like, what is your most favorite part about being in your 20s?
Just knowing that we're still young and we have so many years ahead of us. I think that's one. And I also think that, I think when you get to your like 20 somethings, you start to realize how important family is and like the friendships that you do have. You value them a little bit more because you're at an age where you're a little bit more mature than you were, let's say a couple years back, because you're thinking about like your future and what you want to be doing, like to be successful or whatnot. And so I think it's more of just like understanding and being grateful and appreciative of what you have. And I think that's a great part about being in the 20s, because it's fun like to go out, especially living in New York City. And like you said, like going out, having drinks, meeting random people, like just having a good time. But I think the number one thing is just not being stressed out. Like you have so much time ahead of you, and just value the people that are around you and that support you.
And I 100% agree with you. And also like to connect it to how before we had structure with like going to school and like getting a job and all that, like realizing that like things are not actually like that. And I think just seeing all the possibilities just gets me very excited, and knowing that like we don't have to follow these paths, like especially with creatives and especially with people that like are more into the entrepreneurial aspect of like living in this world.
Oh, I have one thing to say too. I'm also like very grateful of like living in this time, or in general being in our 20s, because like our parents didn't have the same opportunities of creating content and like having so much available through social media. And I think it's almost just like, it's a great way for people that are creative or like are tired of something that they didn't want to do, but it was pushed on them, to understand that there's so many other ways to create an income, or so many other careers out there. And like you can stick up for yourself. I feel like in your 20s, you understand like, hey, I did this and I don't want to do that anymore. I'm going to do this, and hopefully that works out. Like you're a little bit more confident about what you want to do, but still like understanding like progress.
Yeah.
No, yeah, thank you so much for sharing. I like that's something I actually never thought of before, especially with the answer about family, right? Living in the moment and like appreciating your family and your friends. Because like when I think my 20s, I'm like, like the partying, the me on the dance. This is pre-quarantine when I could actually do stuff like that. Like I think about like that time I went out and like danced on like the turtle that at Turtle Bay Tavern. I don't know if anyone remembers that bar, but like remembering that or like staying up to like walking around the street at like 3 a.m. in the summer, like or like being sticky at Halloween, or like I see, I remember those moments, but I do forget those moments sometimes. I do need to reminder, like like appreciating your friends, right? Like making those intentional friendships and creating those intentional relationships with people. Thinking about your family, like I think for us in our 20s, it's like developing that what kind of relationship do you want with your family? Like whether it's your parents, your cousins, your aunt, your uncle, your grandparents, what's that relationship going to look like going forward? And yeah, like just like you. And then the other lesson is just like I forget this too, right? You're still young. Like sometimes I'm like, once again, at that time, like once I'm 30, I'm like evaporating to thin air. Like that's what I think of all the time. I'm like, oh my god, when I'm 30, like that's it. It's over for me. I can't do anything anymore. But knowing that, like, I tell myself all the time, I'm like, listen, Bernie Sanders just got like popular and well known at his like old age of like 70 something. Okay, there is time. I don't need to be, AOC, like Alexandria Ocasio Cortez. She had her peak at 28, and like not her peak, but like her like like her fame at 28, and that's fine, that's great too. But then you got Bernie Sanders over here, who people really started to know him when he was like in his 70s. So it's like time is a construct. It's okay, and I'm only using those two people because I feel like those are two people I look up to in like the field that I'm going into. So it's like, it's time is a construct, and that's something I always forget. And so thank you so much to you both for giving me these affirmations, and I'm sure like the viewers can definitely learn so much from you both. And so the last question I'd love to ask, if you had to go back in time and talk to your younger self about surviving your 20s, what's the one piece of advice that you would give to younger Priscilla and younger Yailyn?
I think it's important to just risk it all. Like just do it out there, have no fear, because like we're in our 20s, and our 20s are the time where we can make as much mistakes as we can. And don't get me wrong, I reflect back on it and I wish that like I would have done a little more, but it's also like I'm still here, and now the present is more than ever to just go and do the things that I truly want to do, and make sure that no one else is holding me back in like negative ways.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of that. And I also think for me, it was just like trusting yourself. So anytime I could think back of like my childhood or growing up, going to school and all these things, I always think about like, what is something that I struggled with? And I think I struggled a lot having my own voice because I was a very quiet kid. So thinking back now, it's just like, I would just say to my younger self, like, stay true to yourself. If you want to do something, do it. And if you don't do it. You don't have to give explanations to anyone. It's literally up to you, and that's it. And just live your life like that.
And I think like it's easier said than done. Like we're saying like trust yourself and risk it all, but it's like taking a step back and like mentally thinking like, what does this mean for me, and like how can I project this to the world is the most important. So, and that is very different for everyone.
Yeah.
No, definitely. It's like you could always like you give the best advice to other people, but then you like never listen to your own things. It's like the affirmations are always needed. Well, thank you so much to you both for coming on. And of course, like I'm gonna promote 20 something podcast. I will promote your Instagram and of course your podcast page. Can you tell the viewers where we can find like which platforms you're on, like Apple Podcast, Spotify, like which platforms you're on, and also if there's anything else that you would both like to promote? Maybe it's like Yailyn, if you have like a makeup page that you would like viewers to see, or other things that you would like other folks to see, because this is your promotion time.
So you can find our podcast on Apple, Google, and Spotify. Also on Buzzsprout, which is like our host. We have like a link to our Instagram, which is at the 20SP on Instagram. So follow us. And I do have my own personal makeup page and a website with all my work, and that's on Instagram. It's Yailyn V Makeup.
And for me, I think something that I would really love to promote is, and it's something that I've noticed that I'm like gearing towards, is agriculture and the way in which we could start feeding our society. Because I don't know if you guys have heard, but there's going to be a point when there's not going to be enough food to feed New York City. And I think it's important to find new sustainable and renewable ways to do that. So just like generally for everyone just to start researching a little bit into that, just for the future.
Yeah, definitely. And like for folks, like just like a background for folks, Priscilla, I think has her own farm. Like I've seen you go to the farm and like do things and cultivate things. It's really cool. I don't know if I'm blowing up your spot, but like you do that. You do that as well as in addition to what you're doing with the podcast. So thank you for you both for coming on. I will put the links to all their podcast pages, their Instagram, their social medias, all the links on the bio below, and of course in the description on our Instagram and everything. So thank you so much, Yailyn and Priscilla, for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us so much. We're also gonna like promote the Rooftop conversations because it's so important what you're doing too. And just like the different you also focus on different things such as like body image and stuff. I remember you were interviewing an artist who like draws your bodies, and I think that was so beautiful. So
that's awesome. I'll let her know. Thank you so much.